similar to other northeastern regions of India, that serve as optimal testing grounds for implementing nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are increasingly being recognized, like we've all heard, as a vital strategy for addressing the impacts of climate change, protecting ecosystems, and conserving biodiversity, playing a crucial role in strengthening the resilience of both landscapes and communities. This panel on scaling nature-based solutions for synergizing biodiversity and climate action will discuss the significance of these solutions and how they could be prioritized in global policy discussions. I will begin by inviting the panelists with their opening remarks for about 2 to 3 minutes due to the paucity of time. We shall follow this up with questions for another round of brief interventions, followed by a Q&A segment with the audience. Mr. Sampath Kumar, I request you to make an introduction.
Thank you. Can I, just like before start,
sure.
in 2 minutes I'll take just 30 seconds. Bakimi Star, can you just bring that one please? Yeah. So he's one of our traditional, village, cooperative person. They are actually preserving these trees called, the living root bridge actually is made up from this tree. This tree is a ficus tree. It's such a beautiful tree. In 30 years, it will grow as a, something that actually they will make it as a living root bridge. It's a beautiful. So just I wanted to tell you this one. Maybe we can actually see. It's very heavy. Thank you. So I just what I wanted to share in this panel. Maybe I can sit and talk. So the importance of actually this knowledge is the key thing for scaling up the nature-based solutions. So we do have a lot of traditional indigenous knowledge is there, but how the traditional indigenous knowledge is able to be scaled up is the key issue for us, today's discussion. If you see, is a young boy, he's actually learning from the elders. So the transmission from that one generation to another generation, how actually we are propagating. So what the Meghalaya is trying to do, I think maybe in fact in the inaugural session, a lot of discussion has happened, how actually the state government is taking up initiatives. But I wanted to focus on 2-3 areas. One, how actually we are able to, scale up these interventions, like, scale up this solution. We know that these work, and in fact, this tree actually, is a keystone species in the living root bridge ecosystem. And based on this tree, about 1,200 flora and fauna are actually living. So how actually we can scale up is essentially what we started doing is that we are organizing the people, the communities. Especially we are organizing the communities into cooperatives, which is a very, very important movement that is happening. We're also organizing especially the women into, again, we call the self-help groups in India. In fact, in other parts you call microfinance-based groups. But what we are doing in India is that we are leveraging these organizations so that the kind of the technology that actually the knowledge that what we have to really provide these solutions can be disseminated through them more effectively because it stays in the village and there is a greater ownership in this entire work. So I think to start with, I would say, one, you need to really leverage the communities and, especially how actually we are using this modern forms of organization, how actually the cooperatives, self-help groups, how actually we are organizing them. Systematically, we are connecting them across the state so that every information, every knowledge can be disseminated very effectively to the last mile persons. That's one. Number two, there is also great opportunity what we have seen by engaging the youth is that the value of the technology today. So how actually we are using the technology for, scaling up this intervention. So I think you must have, we just briefly told you that like we are building a kind of a young environment cadre. We have a panel for that, there will be more discussion on that, but these are the 2 things I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Olga, for a quick overview on the role of nature-based solutions towards urban regeneration.
Yes, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here and to see that this topic is at the forefront of the agenda. In fact, our work at Unicity is supporting cities and regions with climate change adaptation and mitigation, and doing it in such a way that we find unique solutions to the place, rather than using uniform solutions across locations. And in fact, when it comes to nature-based solutions, we've been at the forefront of this, because already in 2014-15, this was our approach, and at that time, it was not so much on the international agenda as yet. At that time, projects that were most popular were heavy engineering solutions. For example, if you're facing floods with the increased and more intense rainfalls, as it happens due to climate change, then typically you would look into where to put a dam or where to put pumping stations to pump water out, or sometimes put a protective wall so that water doesn't flood an area of your city, for example. And so the weakness of these solutions, when you jump at them immediately, is that they tend to be your capital sinks, because such engineering solutions are extremely costly and they don't generate any co-benefits. If you put a pumping station, it will only pump your water out. It will not do anything else. Now, when you look at nature-based solutions, say, for example, we want to solve a flood issue, and we look into how we can activate our natural ecosystems, blue ecosystems, green ecosystems, in such a way that they absorb the water when it comes during monsoon, for example, where rainfalls are the most intense, then not only we solve the flood issue, but we also create beautiful spaces. I'm sure you've heard, for example, of China's program. At some point it was very popular, the sponge cities, as they called it, where you would look at parks, which are dry parks, when rainfalls are not happening, but when rainfalls are happening, it's organized in such a way that you can still walk, there are paths, but there is water under you. So parks are utilized, it creates recreational places for citizens, it increases your health benefits because you have cleaner air due to these places, it mitigates heat, especially inside cities, it becomes very critical because the less tree shading cover you're having, the less comfortable the city is at certain temperature. So Meghalaya is very lucky to have a mild climate, but even in such places, in some countries where I worked, heat island effect or specific temperature in densely built areas becomes unbearable. So it's very important to really look into how nature-based solutions can really solve several problems at once. So this is a very critical point here. And I guess to conclude my opening remarks, I would say that it's very important to work in layers. It's not that engineering solutions are a no-go area, but it's very important to put them after nature-based solutions, because you can solve with nature at a much bigger scale, in a much softer way, with less capital, and many more co-benefits. And then you will find that in some areas you still need to top up with engineering solutions. And then your capital is going spent in a very wise manner, because you really put it where things are most needed after you've already tried addressing it with much more holistic approaches.
Since we're running short of time, may I also check on a follow-up question with you? If you could quickly tell us, what can cities do to actually implement nature-based solutions in the process of development?
Right. So cities is our area of expertise, because mostly we work with helping cities adapt to climate change and mitigate climate change. And here I'd like to give the example of a city we recently worked with, which I feel is very similar to Shillong. This is the city of Baguio in the Philippines. And this city is also a hill station, a very popular tourist destination, very hilly area, very prone to floods and flood or rainfall-induced landslides. So when we looked at this city, and our focus was on supporting the city in mitigating these challenges, we didn't jump into only looking how we can address floods and landslides, and they also have some other issues such as forest fires, sinkholes, etc. We actually looked at what makes the city not optimally comfortable both for citizens and for visitors. And we realized that traffic and pollution, traffic-related pollution, are extremely intense because everyone, the citizens and the visitors, tend to go to one or two specific places in the core center. So this creates a lot of congestion. There is more and more built up coming in this area to accommodate for demand. And therefore, there is more flooding happening because the soil is no longer able to absorb the water. So what we saw as a very optimal solution for the city was to create several nature-based attraction hubs in different areas of the city, so that you offload the pressure on the city center, so people start going in different directions. And there are wonderful opportunities of vertical parks, recreational areas which people can enjoy. So you offload the traffic and you work on a better public transportation. So this way, people move in a more comfortable way. You reduce pollution. You mitigate floods and landslides in most critical areas. So there is a very special, process, scientific process you have to go through with using satellite data, doing climate change projections. So of course, all of that was done. So we were very clear with maps on which areas are most vulnerable. And we looked into how we can transform them into opportunities for the city, how we can create hubs of attraction in these places and ease the traffic. So in that way, nature-based solutions become part of creating a whole identity of a place where people now want to stay as citizens, they want to come and visit, and they have a comfortable experience. So I think this is the beauty of nature-based solutions. You can do so much more than just addressing one issue at once.
Thank you. Thanks, Olga. So we'll come and hear about a rural perspective from Judith about her work in rural areas.
Thank you. Indeed, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And when you talk about nature-based solutions with regard, or rather with the perspective from rural areas and with a major bias towards smallholder farmers who are mainly the most affected. You see, normally the world's most vulnerable are usually the highest affected. And when we talk about nature-based solutions, it means we're looking at holistically addressing the issues around climate change, and again, sustainably, in a way that we're able to sustain this into the future. And when we talk about nature-based solutions, and especially in the work that I do, we work a lot around helping resource-poor farmers achieve food security. And this is because for these farmers, their dietary diversity is dependent on the crops they grow, the livestock they rear, and therefore for either the household, for the household's dietary diversity, again goes back to what they're able to do. And if they're able to sustain their production and they're able to do production holistically, they're able to maintain their soils, they're able to be able to get seed, they're able to grow their food, and not just during season, but food production that is able to sustain them in and out of season. So while the limit, while we work on this to limit the impact of natural disasters, for instance, when there is flooding or droughts, or like we're just coming out of a prolonged drought in the Eastern Horn of Africa, and this means for them, their exposure, or rather their ability to persevere the shock, is really dependent on how well they're able to maintain and manage themselves. And this is also impacting on their socioeconomic impact. And really, the patterns keep changing. We can no longer rely on rain patterns as is. But if we're able to, say, do a lot of water harvesting to make sure that whatever rain that came in, we're able to harvest the water, and this is two-pronged, because the water that is harvested is used for irrigation, but then also it means it reduces downstream flooding, because usually we've been experiencing patterns of extremes. It's either it's dry, very dry, or when it rains again, the water now again causes downstream flooding. And now it's a problem on both extremes. But with this, it means if you're able to harvest the water, you solve two problems. You're able to have water when the rainy season is off. And again, during the rainy season, you cover the communities that are downstream. While we do this, we work closely by validating the small-scale farmers. And in this instance, because they're the people that understand where they come from, they're the people who understand their soils, they're the people who understand their seed systems, they're the people who understand what they're able to do best. So we validate them and work very closely with them to make sure that, again, we are working within their systems, we are working within their food preferences, and we are working within what they know as a society. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Judith. Actually, you answered my next question for you, which was on how local communities can be empowered as well to actually come up with nature-based solutions. So thank you. Mr. Rajesh, I come to you. Could you tell us more about the ecosystem-based approaches that you have initiated, and specifically to do with the role of state governments in implementing nature-based solutions?
Thank you very much. First of all, very good afternoon to all of you from the state of Arunachal Pradesh. I represent the state of Arunachal Pradesh here. And thank you also for this opportunity. So when it comes to nature-based solutions, perhaps this is a region where we rather have to discuss this matter, as the Honorable Chief Minister highlighted in the very beginning. Biodiversity, people, and climate action, they have to go together hand by hand. And this discussion is having a lot of meaning to the times forward. And when it comes to climate action, as like any part of the world, our region is also not free from the impacts of climate change. Maybe it is expressed as very like unusual rainfalls here, or shortening rainfall durations, or very kind of unexpected kind of drought. We can't say drought, but a little less water available season. But of course, this has been impacting the livelihood of the communities in the region, as was highlighted by a few examples by the previous speakers in the inaugural. And the case is same in the state of Arunachal Pradesh as well. So to respond to these climate changes, the state has pioneered in the country by following the national policies on climate action to decide to go for a state level declaration on climate change. So we have adopted a declaration, rather a subnational declaration on climate change called the Parquet Declaration, with the 75 cross-cutting strategies to respond to climate change. So these strategies are available online, so now there is not much time to describe them quickly, so I will skip that. But the strategies are cutting across the different sections of livelihood options like agriculture, animal husbandry, veterinary, fishery, which are very relevant to the landscapes in the region. Similarly, habitat, healthcare, gender inclusions, and all those areas which have been impacted by climate change. So we have been implementing these actions, climate actions in Arunachal Pradesh with short, medium, and long-term defined actions. And we have also started to finance these actions, because when it comes to the role of state governments, first is to pursue the actions with a well-laid policy framework that we started. Thereafter, we need to supplement the actions with resources. Of course, our state has, of course, like any state, there will be always constraints on resource availabilities. Despite that, we pursued the idea of climate-linked financing. So last year, around 75 actions were financed, which cut across mitigation actions, adaptation actions, and some of them are hybrid actions. So we could pursue the actions across many land use sectors, in health sector, in urban habitat sectors, and we are continuing with that. And this year also, we have the second edition of Action Plan for Climate Adaptation and Resilience, backed by climate-linked financing. And hopefully, our aim is that by 2047, the state of Arunachal Pradesh will become a climate-resilient state. That's the aim. And when it comes to nature-based solutions per se, in the context of Northeast, where it's all like biodiversity, we are sitting in the hotspot of biodiversity, where several indigenous communities are strongly dependent and have evolved with the ecosystems, and the ecosystems and the biodiversity have been their identity and parcel of their livelihood. So to achieve all these and to restore the lost integrity of the ecosystems, we need to pursue certain actions targeting on water conservation, restoration of the degraded forest, as well as green livelihood options. Because as Honorable CM Sir said, without livelihood options, things may not move around. So this is in some quick reflection of the scenario from Arunachal Pradesh. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Mr. Wagle, we'll come to you, your experiences from Nepal about the many initiatives. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's useful to go last because one can comment on the wonderful initiatives and the insights that panelists have shared. The big question is why there is underscaling and underfunding of many of these worthwhile initiatives, right? A lot of the action is local, but the impact is global, so there's a problem of collective action. A lot of the ecosystems straddle national borders, so there's a problem of the free riders, right? So countries would rather let others take the initiative. And there's also this power asymmetry, right? Because the communities would want to take initiatives, but corporations or larger entities, external parties, may have other interests, but are often more powerful, a bigger voice. And so this asymmetry is also at work. So we see that there's underfunding of many of these efforts. Globally, it's only around $120, $150 billion, where the need, or the gap alone, is another $800 billion, right? So this is where I think we need to emphasize actors, so cities and rural communities and state-level action, but it's also mechanisms of action, not just actors, but mechanisms of action. That's very important. So this is where social norms come into the picture. Tobacco smoking used to be very popular in the 60s and the 70s. Now it's a taboo. Early days of COVID, we resisted wearing masks, but soon enough it caught on and became almost a universal phenomenon. So, recycling, environmentally friendly actions in terms of lifestyle and the way we cook, the way we commute, all these actually need to be internalized and can be done through social norms, right? The second is hard incentives and regulation. This is where prices, finance come into the picture. So green pension funds, for example, or carbon pricing and all that become important. Then this is very cost-effective community-based initiatives when it comes to nature-based solutions. UNDP came up with this finding just 2 years ago, 20 cost-effective actions related to forests, wetlands, and grasslands can meet almost 40% of the mitigation needed for the 2-degree cap by 2030, and reforestation alone accounts for more than 2/3 of this. So Meghalaya, I'm happy to note, is setting the gold standard. My own country, Nepal, had a forest cover of just 26% 30 years ago. Now it's 45%. How did that happen? Community-based forestry management and a lot of volunteerism. Initial nudge from foreign aid. The Australians actually can take a lot of credit for that. So there's something to celebrate there in a country that hasn't had much to celebrate on the economic front. On the social, political, environmental, there's a lot to do there.
Yes, so since you mentioned funding and incentive, my question to you is how can philanthropies and financial organizations, probably institutions, come together to encourage nature-based solutions?
It's catching on, right? It's a lagging field, but it's now catching on. After the 1990s, when we saw a lot of this third wave of democratization, a lot of philanthropic entities assisted good governance efforts. In the 2000s with Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation funding a lot of public health and public education. Now one sees this gradual move towards green efforts, climate, right? So Jeff Bezos of Amazon, I think, with his $10 billion announcement, Bezos Earth Fund or something. Mike Bloomberg, when he was mayor of New York, was already moving into this area. The late Steve Jobs and his widow, Mrs. Powell Jobs, also have given $4 billion. So there's a lot of efforts that is worth emulating, but these need a combined effort. So multilaterals coming in, philanthropies coming in, private sector drawn in. So just last week, I was very encouraged to see this press release from the GEF, Global Environmental Facility, where they talk about a game-changing global biodiversity framework fund to protect, restore, and ensure the sustainable use of nature, right? This is to implement the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Development Fund, announced last week, hopefully come into operation in August, where they expect to rope in these big philanthropic entities, states chipping in to the multilateral architecture, but a lot of the action has to happen at the urban level, the rural level, and also at the state level when it comes to big countries.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Before we move to the audience, Mr. Subodh, I'll come back to you to end this discussion amongst us, is that you spoke a lot about the new models of delivery for nature-based solutions. So would you like to share with us, what are the models that you're working on or suggesting?
So, one I said, I think I go with, again, Dr. Swarnim, what he mentioned about the new incentives, are the need for mobilizing more support for this entire climate action or, scaling nature-based solutions. So one thing that I see, the greatest opportunity that what we have is the states, nation state. So if, a lot of discussions are happening at a very high level, COP26 and different other places. We talk about carbon credits. But this entire discussion has to go to the grassroots level. So the key thing is that, today you have seen that movie about payment to ecosystem services. We must have seen some young people. They know how to measure. They use this MRV framework. So where they know about it, how to measure what is the change that is happening. So building that kind of a social capital is the key for scaling up nature-based solutions. So we need to demystify this entire science. Actually, there is already science is there. So how to actually demystify that entire thing and make it more, user-friendly. So the way the young people are using in the remote areas, the technologies and the data, and, so that's one very important thing. The second thing is that we also have to leverage the various, basically what is missing in this action is, for example, even within our state, I'll give an example, very honest example. We have so many departments. So we have a water resources department, we have a forest and environment department, we have solid water conservation department, we have a community and rural development department. There are so many agencies are there. The need is to collaborate. Everyone has to collaborate, not just to implement what they are doing, but they have to see the big picture. And the main important thing is that the person who brought this, the plan, they should be the center of our action. How actually we are really involving them in this entire community. So idea of like the new models is that I'll conclude with one thing which is happening very interestingly in India. You must have heard of this natural, farming. Natural farming. They used to call zero budget natural farming, ZBNF. So now we are calling it natural farming, which is again a very interesting regenerative farming that is, it's known in a lot of science forums. That entire regenerative farming is now actually has been really made so simplified. Now the women self-help groups are taking up that work across the country. In fact, especially started with Andhra Pradesh. In Meghalaya also we started that work. So this kind of, we need to involve this kind of platforms, especially the women-led platforms, young people, how actually we are engaging them, how actually we are bringing that collaborative governance and building the state capability to drive this agenda. So, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take questions from the audience now. I invite you to raise your hand and someone with a mic will come to you. Yeah. We have one at the back. Please introduce yourself and I request you to keep your question concise.
Hi, thanks a lot for a very interesting start to the discussions today. I'm from the World Resources Institute, Shruti Malivar, and my question is specifically from Olga. So especially for a city scale, it was really interesting to hear your notes about sponge infrastructure solutions and biodiversity hubs that are created for flood management within the city, and how these can also work with, say, vertical gardens and other smaller sites that can be leveraged to increase biodiversity in the city, while also looking at flood management solutions. So my question to you is, what kind of citizen engagement schemes and incentives are provided, for example, to enable implementation at a much larger scale, and especially for operational and maintenance purposes? And what kind of partnership models do you create, say, with private agencies, with the government, with citizens, to really enable a more citizen-led action when it comes to scaling some of these interventions, as they can be very punctual?
Thank you very much for your question. It is indeed a crucial one, and crucial at two levels. First, at the level of even agreeing on implementing nature-based solutions, because actually, essentially we work with developing Asian countries, a little bit in Africa. We started working lately as well. And there are a number of challenges that Western governments face less, you could say. So, for example, implementing nature-based solutions can be very sensitive if you have vested interests, because it means you have to protect certain land, make it public, rather than, give it for development, for example. And so there, I really find that if citizens felt more their entitlement, that, okay, I have the right to live in a quality environment where parks are walking distance, where when I walk, I don't run high risk to be hit by a car or by a motorbike. And then citizens voice it out, because then this is what enables governments as well to really seriously look in this direction, rather than so we often work on behalf of United Nations agencies or development banks. So we provide this technical assistance to cities, and while we are very nicely received, action sometimes doesn't follow, because there is no that pressure, that demand from people. So I think first is really empowering people to think that, okay, this is my environment, I have the right to it, and all the empowerment campaigns from NGOs, from local communities, can help a great deal. At some point we did actually an assessment of how Bangalore was reviving its lakes, and it really came down, we spoke to these NGOs, it really came down to a few very active citizens who created the whole movement of requesting that these lakes now should be revived, should be preserved. And the government had to follow, because these people were extremely active and extremely clear on what they want. So this is one point. Second point, as you mentioned, maintenance, preserving what has been done. So there, yes, again, people have to feel that this is my place. And I think it's connected to the first point, when they know that, okay, now I have right to be there. So, I lived in India actually for a long time, for about 10 years until COVID, in New Delhi. And so what I noticed is that there are some parks which officially are public, but de facto they're gated colonies. And so if I come there nicely dressed, no one will stop me. But then another person who looks, maybe from not, the category of population who lives in that area, they want to go to that park, they may face issues, or maybe they may not, but they feel that they may face issues and therefore they're not using it. So I think that kind of a social acceptance that if the better the overall city, the better everyone is, no matter which social level you are at, that kind of an awareness can also help a lot for people to feel that this is my place and therefore I will take care of it, because it's not someone else's, it's mine.
Okay, I think we'll have time for one more question. Can we have... Okay, let's go.
You could take this to save the time.
Hello. I think this question is for Mr. Sampath Kumar. I'm a church Mormon. I'm a community leader. First of all, I congratulate the government for the PAS program. But my question is, there is no, the aspect of the traditional knowledge, is not in the scheme of things. So, I mean, the indigenous knowledge is being ignored. In fact, the very fact that you have the forest till today is because of the indigenous knowledge. So, I mean, that is the question. Where is the indigenous knowledge? And the second question is with regard to the natural farming. By default, our traditional farming system is natural farming. So the question is, why are not we promoting our own indigenous farming system? Thank you.
So that's a beautiful question. This is the same thing that I would like to say about how actually we can scale the nature-based solution. First, to scale up the nature-based solutions, we do have. The first thing is that, and there is so much, this knowledge is there, especially with the indigenous communities, and especially with the farmers. So that's where this entire effort should go on. So when you are asking about this one, this is where the solutions, for example, this is where we need to bring a little bit of the science, along with the indigenous knowledge. So how actually we can, for example, this particular living root bridge work. So when we started this conservation, this project, we saw everyone used to know that there is 1 or 2 villages has a living root bridge. Then there is with the World Bank support, we started this community-led landscape management project. There, one of the initiative was that how to actually identify this entire indigenous practices. And then we did this entire survey. We found like about 100 villages have these living root bridges. And some villages, they were neglected because of the developmental efforts, they were not taken proper care. And, so then when we started organizing people, that like importance of this actually, preserving these practices. So then the change has come. So that is something that is definitely is a very, very important thing, as you said. In fact, to scale up, nature-based solutions, yes, there are already nature-based solutions, but to scale up, you require a community-based, community-led organizations. So that is what the kind of innovation that we need to build. What are the community-based organizations? How actually we are involving the women through the self-help group movement? How actually we are involving the men through, the cooperatives, and men and women together actually through cooperatives. So these are the kind of initiatives that we are taking up. I think, yeah, yes. I know.
I think we've ended the discussion on a perfect note, and I'm very thankful to the panelists for their patience and for keeping time. And big thank you to the audience as well. Thank you.